Hmm.
Yeah, so the number one question that I get from people is how do I set boundaries without guilt and shame? And I can tell you that, but it's not a quick fix. So what it's about is deciding how you want to live your life, what's important to you. So what I do is I take my clients through an exercise to determine their top 5 values, and they use those values almost like guardrails or guideposts for when and where to set boundaries. So, for example, if you say, my health is really important to me, then you're going to have boundaries in place to promote and support your health. So those could be, I have financial boundaries. I put money towards meditation, yoga, exercise. I have time boundaries. I set aside time to do yoga, to meditate, to go outside and walk. I have a limit for myself. I don't stay up past 11:30 at night.
Okay, so welcome everyone to this episode of Woman Fully Alive. I'm your host, Madeline Eames, and I'm really excited to get into our conversation today because I think it will relate to pretty much all of my listeners. And so my guest today is Barb Nangle, and Barb is a boundaries coach. So many of you are probably already going, yes, that's me. Coach me on my boundaries. Barb is a speaker and a founder of and CEO of High Power Coaching and Consulting. And she also has her own podcast. So if this intrigues you, go to her podcast called Fragmented to Whole. Love that. Life Lessons from 12 Step Recovery. So welcome, Barb.
Thank you so much, Madeline. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm feeling fully alive right now, so I feel like this is the right place for me to be.
Good, good, good. You're going to take us there too. So Barb, I would love to know a little bit more about your own story and how you came in your life to
Mhm.
focus on what we're going to be talking about, which is learning to say no without guilt and shame, like the boundaries,
Yeah.
and then the codependence. Like, how did that
Mhm.
become
Mhm.
your thing?
Yeah, so I'll do this as briefly as I can. So in 2015, when I was 52 years old, I hit a codependent bottom, and I didn't know what the word codependent was. So if there's other people that don't, welcome to the club. This was despite having been in therapy since I was 15, getting introduced to self-help genre at like 22, and reading voraciously to this day. Workshops, workbooks, retreats, spiritual groups, support, like you name it. Had never heard the word codependent, which essentially means a person who's codependent is focused on that which is outside themselves. So they need validation outside themselves. They pay attention and focus on other people and what are they doing or not doing? What does he need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need? And really tends to completely ignore themselves. The classic codependent is in a relationship of some kind with an addict or an alcoholic, though that doesn't have to be the case. So I hit a codependent bottom. I won't go into the details because that could be a long story. And I landed in 12-step recovery initially for codependence. And I remember having a sense of relief very quickly and saying to someone, I think I need to be reparented. But I didn't know reparenting was actually a thing. And I thought I made that up.
Hmm.
And then 6 weeks into going to Codependence Anonymous, I went to go visit a friend who at that point had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 10 years. And she had just raved
Okay.
about the benefits of and how dramatically her life was transformed. I'm like, you're going to love it. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous. So she said, well, let's see if we can find a CODA meeting while you're here and we'll go together. And she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I knew of as ACOA, Adult Children of
Yes.
Alcoholics. I didn't think I qualified. She does. But I was like, I'll go for you. And I walk in, and in one of the opening ratings, they said, we reparent ourselves. And I was like, wait, what? And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child. And I was like, oh my God, this is for me. And I learned it's actually adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. Now, that I do qualify for. And my friend
Mm-hmm.
tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that. I bought the literature, came home to New Haven, started going to ACA, and very quickly started getting a really enormous sense of relief, feeling like changing, understanding myself in ways, learning things I never knew about myself. I soon started doing the 12 steps with a group of other women. Then a Friday night women's meeting for that fellowship started. I started going to that. I still go to that. And I was just astonished at the massive changes. And the way that I think of all those years of the personal development before Madeline was that stuff scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery melted the iceberg. And I think that part of it is 12 steps of recovery are amazing technology. So it's a stepwise program, it's a spiritual program, and we do it with other people who are going on the same journey.
Mm.
But ACA specifically is a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. So I didn't know that I had childhood trauma. I used to
Mm-hmm.
think that trauma, like I think most people do, trauma is like a blunt thing, like you were attacked or you were in a hurricane or a war. And what I actually realized is that I had what's called relational trauma. I think of it as like the continual drip, drip, drip of emotional invalidation, and
Mm-hmm.
emotional abandonment, that sort of thing. So I was just really astonished at how quickly things were changing. And about a year into that journey, I decided to let go of Coda because for me, it was maybe a 75% fit, whereas ACA was 100%. And that turned out
Okay.
to be a higher powered moment because one of the women I was doing the 12 steps with had started talking, sharing about her behavior and thinking around her eating, and had started going to Overeaters Anonymous and was very gently trying to get me to go with her. And I did. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a compulsive overeater. So I'm in that fellowship. I'm now down over 100 pounds from my top
Whoa.
weight. And actually
Congratulations.
Saturday
That's
will be
huge.
my, yeah, and Saturday is my 7-year anniversary of being at my goal weight. So I have been in that program, we
Okay.
call it abstinent, which is the equivalent of being sober in an alcohol program. So in mid-April, God willing, I will be abstinent for 9 years. And in April, I will be in ACA for 10 years. So my life,
Congratulations.
thank
Yeah.
you.
What
And
a
so,
10 years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's radically like the 50s was my best decade ever. Like who would think,
Mm.
but
I love
like,
to
wow.
hear that.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the 60s being even better because I'm going to be 62 in March. Well, just a little bit more, I want to say, in that I have had like years of a substance use and, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, dysfunctional,
Mm-hmm.
toxic relationships and stuff like that. But my core wound is really codependence. And so I learned so many life skills and tips and tricks and mindset shifts and 12-step recovery, but learning how to build healthy boundaries changed everything for me. I was working full
Okay.
at Yale University at the time, and I was astonished at the ripple effect on my team. And I was like, wait a minute, none of them are in recovery. What's going on here? And it just goes to show
Right.
that when one person changes the dynamics of their interactions with others, that it can really change things around them. So a
Mm-hmm.
couple years into recovery, I got laid off from Yale and through a series of serendipitous events, found my way into the world of startups, innovation, and entrepreneurship in New Haven and at Yale. Started my own business, very quickly started the podcast, not having any idea what I was doing, not thinking it would be connected to my business. But because I was like, there's all this wisdom in recovery that's not making it out into the world. All of the things I
Yeah.
learned in the first
Okay.
couple of years I'd never learned in those almost 40 years of therapy and
Wow. That
health
says
and all that
something.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I started just sort of generally coaching, and after a couple years, realized you got to have a niche. And I worked with a coach who helped me, and it was just like, oh my God, I got to be a boundaries coach. It just makes total sense for me. And so
Okay.
I learned to build boundaries through a haphazard, meandering path through the 12 steps of recovery. And then after I got good boundaries, I started reading about them and it helped me retroactively understand what
Mm.
happened and what was happening. And so when I was reading, I would do these drawings to like visually depict how I conceived of those
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. Well, those drawings turned into handouts, which turned into a workbook, which is the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. So I now have a multimedia 12 module curriculum that I take people through So I've developed an accelerated process for people to build boundaries. So they don't have to do this 2 to 3 year meandering haphazard path like I
Yes.
do.
It's
And
like
I
take me there. Accelerate.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think like probably the thing that people like to hear the most as a result of my boundaries, there's so many benefits, is that I'm now for the first and only time in a healthy romantic relationship. And I've been together with my sweetheart for in October was 6 years. And I just
Okay.
had no idea that this kind of relationship was possible. And I also had no idea what I was doing. I knew
Mm,
I was attracted, or I knew that men who were emotionally available were attracted to me. I didn't understand that I was also attracted to them. And
that
I didn't
weren't
understand
emotionally available. Is that what you
they
said?
were not
That were
emotionally
not.
available.
Were
They
not.
were not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I only saw them as being attracted to me. When I got in recovery, I saw, oh, wait, I'm attracted to them too. And then
Uh-huh.
I also saw, well, here's why, because I was emotionally unavailable.
Right.
And
Okay. Like even to
right.
yourself, you weren't emotionally available.
Precisely, absolutely to myself. So if I can't be emotionally available to myself, I cannot be emotionally available to someone else.
Oof.
And
Yeah.
like all of these things that I've talked about so far and more were affected by building boundaries because you have to deal with feelings when you're building boundaries. That's a huge part of what I do in my coaching is helping people manage the feelings like the guilt and shame. So I'm going to stop there
Right.
because I know I've said a
Okay.
lot. I could go on.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Like first of all, what jumps out at me is how well, first of all, dispelling the myth of, being codependent doesn't always, or having those traits doesn't mean that you're necessarily in a relationship with someone who's an alcoholic.
No.
Which is sometimes that what people think, like um, managing an alcoholic. But what you're saying, can you just say that definition one more time of
Yeah.
codependence when you're
Yeah.
putting validation outside yourself?
Well, I think it's like the umbrella is you're focused on that which is outside yourself. So it could be other people, what they think, what they think of you, what they're doing, what they're not doing. It could be I have to fix everything around me. So what does the situation need? What does the organization need? What does the cause need? What's
Mm-hmm.
required here? Never really paying attention to yourself. And, when we get farther into like changing that pattern, we start to realize, well, one of the reasons I'm so focused on other people is because I don't want to be focused internally. That
Mm-hmm.
is on my feelings. Like I can't deal with my feelings. And so we get to become emotionally available to ourselves.
Right. Like that just kind of that just blows up the definition. You could be
Mhm,
overly
mhm,
focused on, yeah, what other people think of you, or
mhm,
maybe, well, what you
mhm,
look like, or you're out, like the validation from outside, which, in
mhm.
my world speaks to almost 100% of the people that come for therapy or come to programs,
Yeah.
because there's a
Yeah.
realization that it's a very precarious place to live when you're dependent on the external world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like I just had a call this morning with someone who's thinking of coaching with me, and she said, the mental gymnastics that I go through are insane because she's constantly thinking about like 10 steps down the road, how are my actions going to affect like every single person around me? And she's never
Yeah.
thinking about like, what do I want to do? And so learning how to build healthy boundaries is learning to focus internally
Hmm.
and
Okay.
I think of it as being situated. I am situated in me, in my life, and
Hmm.
in my body. Whereas I was out there all over the place and, of course,
Yeah. Out
exhausted
there.
all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is one of the keys. I mean, you found it as the key that kind of unlocked the door.
For me,
It's the
yeah,
key
yeah,
to, yeah, to so many conditions, like, I mean, anxiety, even like exhaustion and
yeah.
burnout, all of
Hmm.
these things. So
Yeah,
you found that actually implementing, and I want to get into how that works,
yeah, yeah.
the boundary, you
Hmm.
then, by doing that, from what I'm understanding, then all these things came up that needed to be healed, rather than
Hmm.
the other way around. Like
Well, I
I'm
was
gonna be
doing a lot.
counselor.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so take
yeah.
me through. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
the
I'll tell
feelings,
you,
the
like,
guilt and shame. Hmm.
Yeah, so the number one question that I get from people is how do I set boundaries without guilt and shame? And I can tell you that, but it's not a quick fix. So what it's about is deciding how you want to live your life, what's important to you. So what I do is I take my clients through an exercise to determine their top 5 values, and they use those values almost like guardrails or guideposts for when and where to set boundaries. So for example, if you say my health is really important to me, then you're going to have boundaries in place to promote and support your health. So those could be, I have financial boundaries. I put money towards meditation, yoga, exercise. I have time boundaries. I set aside time to do yoga, to meditate, to go outside and walk. I have a limit for myself. I don't stay up past 11:30 at night, whereas I used to stay up all night long flipping through the TV channels. I
Even
have
11:30 is way past my bedtime. Yeah.
Right,
Yes,
and so,
I
but
get
that works for me, right? That's my
it.
boundary.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be yours. And like, I
Yeah.
don't allow people to smoke. That's a limit. I don't allow people to smoke in my house. That's a limit. So I think of boundaries as standards we have for our own lives, hopefully that we live up to. And then there's limits that we place on ourselves and other people to uphold those standards. So when you start actually setting boundaries and living your life, I think of it as living on purpose. Some people call it living proactively or intentionally. And you start setting boundaries like that, you start to, because you're doing it according to what matters to you. And your particular bundle of values is yours for a reason. They're not there for no reason. And so if you use those as guideposts for how to live your life and you're situated in you, you stop caring so much what other people think. So if somebody is going to get upset with me because like I mentioned, I'm in recovery for compulsive overeating. So let's say someone invited me to go out to a brunch buffet on Sunday. I'm going to decline. Number one, I buffets don't really work for me. Number two, I eat at approximately the same time. 11 o'clock is not a meal time for me. And number three, it's not that I never go out to eat to socialize, but it's rare. I try to socialize.
Mm.
Let's go for a walk. Let's go for coffee. Let's play games, something not food because of my history. So
Mhm.
if I say to somebody, I'm not going to make it for brunch, can we have coffee later or do something else? And they get upset with me because I don't want to go to their brunch buffet, I can live with that because I'm protecting my health, which is really
Yeah.
important to me because of all the years of abuse and neglect that I did to myself. And I really want to live to
Mhm.
100. So I want to maintain, my healthy and happy, joyous and free life. And so I'm situated in me. And so because I'm really focused on what matters to me and not so much on what matters to them, then the guilt and shame, it's like it melts away. And so what I'm talking about, Madeline, is I'm getting into integrity with myself. Well,
Mhm.
integrity is another word for wholeness. So
Mm.
it's pretty easy to withstand other people's judgments when you feel whole. And so
Right.
I've discovered like what are the boundaries of Barb, like the shape of Barb? Where does Barb end and other people begin? So
Right.
that, when we do that more and more and more, we stop caring so much about what other people think. And this doesn't mean we don't care at all. So I think
Yeah.
for me, the core thing that enabled me to go from no boundaries for 50 something years to having such healthy boundaries that I coach people is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other
Mm.
people do. And again, it doesn't mean I don't care at all. What it means
Mhm.
is that I used to be willing to throw my integrity out the window and say yes to things I didn't want to do, say things were okay with me that were not, say I'm fine when I was dying inside. So I was
Mhm.
lying. And I went
Mhm.
about doing things to get people to approve of me or like me or think that I was helpful. That's called manipulation. So I'm
Mhm.
not willing to do that stuff anymore. It's more important for me to be an honest woman of integrity than it is for you to like me. So I want
Right.
you to approve of me, but I don't like with claws need you to approve of
Need
me the way
it.
I used to. Part of
Yeah.
that is that I now approve of me because I'm living in integrity with myself, which I didn't know I was
Beautiful.
not doing.
Yeah.
So it's that integrity
Yeah.
piece that is the antidote to the
Yeah.
guilt and the pain.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. This just like lights up every part of everything. When you really come down to that integrity, like realizing that you do have a choice and you can choose yourself. Like when it comes to going out for dinner, like, or for
Mhm.
brunch, like you
Mhm.
can literally choose yourself and say, that doesn't
Yes,
work for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
This is
yeah,
how I work in the world, at the risk of
yes.
losing friends, at the risk
Hmm.
of losing people, because you
Right.
are more
Yeah.
important
Right.
than, I mean, you're not saying that you're more
Well,
worthy than that person,
right,
but your
exactly.
focus
But
is
you're
on yourself.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I somebody said this to me last year, and I love this, and I haven't personally used it myself, but I'm really recommending it. It's to say something like this to people. If you want the best of me and you deserve the best of me, and I want you to have the best of me, then you will XYZ, like whatever the boundary is. So it's about giving your best to other people. And the way you're going to have your best is things like not overdoing it, filling
Mhm.
your cup first so that you're not trying to pour from an empty cup, but instead you can pour from the overflow. It means
Yeah.
not doing things you don't really like doing. It means
Hmm.
doing things that energize you. It means things like resting and relaxing and refueling. And if
This is
somebody
it.
is gonna really upset with you and not be your friend because you didn't go to a brunch buffet with them, like, are they really that good of a friend? Like, what kind of a
Yeah.
relationship is that? And
That's
so
a
you get to,
question. Yeah.
I never had any like profound, like, we're gonna end this relationship conversations, but I did lose people. And it was because they faded away. And it was
Hmm.
because I stopped doing all of the work. I stopped doing all the phone calls and the social arrangements and the emails and throwing out ideas and so when I stopped reaching out to people all the time, I stopped seeing them, which is really sad. But now those people are, I think it was they're out of the way. And so now I'd rather
Hmm.
be in relationship with people who want to be in relationship with me and who
Hmm.
also reach out to me. And, so there's a mutuality to my
Yeah.
relationships, whereas in the past, they were very unbalanced because I was putting in all the effort. And
Right.
by the
Right.
way, resentment is a really good indicator. It's time for
Okay.
bed.
Absolutely. So for anybody that's listening to this that's going, I guess that's me, like it's that energy that you were of trying, of needing to make this friendship work, that you
Mhm,
just stopped, that you stopped doing. And
mhm,
because
mhm,
when you're in that energy,
mhm,
there is that resentment that shows up,
mhm,
and
mhm,
if you don't have good boundaries, you are going to have resentment,
mhm,
because there's
mhm.
all kinds of people that will just get their way and walk all over you, and just
Right.
because,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and stepping out of that blaming of other people. If
Hmm.
you're always
Hmm.
going for brunch at 11 o'clock, then you're all, that's what they expect. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Right.
So tell me, how do you, when you actually, so most people that don't fit with that, they kind of naturally move off or move away or fade away. But how do you deal with like actual pushback in that moment of like, come on, it's a brunch. I really want to see you, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, so if somebody said that to me, that's great. I love that you want to see me and I want to see you too, but brunch just doesn't work for me. How about if we together for coffee later that day? So that is,
Hmm.
I'm giving an alternative, right? So that's one
Right.
way of doing it.
It doesn't have to
But
be a
if
hard
it's
no. Yeah.
right, but if it's just like let's just say this was like the fourth time after I started setting boundaries to that person, and this was the last straw for me. Let's just say
Mm-hmm.
that, okay? So I would say something like, I'm starting to see a pattern here, and that is that when I say what I want, I don't feel like you're respecting that. And so I'm just going to pass. And if you don't understand, then I'm afraid, I can live with that if you don't understand. So th there's
Clear.
there's like a whole continuum of ways to say no to people. Like sometimes you actually say no. Sometimes you give an alternative. Sometimes you say things like, like my boundaries are always for me and not against you, and they're about me and not about you. But sometimes it helps to make that abundantly clear by saying, like, I have a rule, like, I have a new rule. I no longer get together with friends for meals for socializing because of my food recovery program. So they get
Mm,
the idea. This isn't about me. This is about Barb, right?
yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I might say, like, let's say we're in the workplace. I will no longer be involved in workplace politics. So
Mhm.
if someone keeps trying to rope you into something and you've decided, like, I'm not getting involved in that anymore, you just say, I'm not getting involved. And if they say, why not? You just say, I'm just not. Because you can explain yourself to people if
Mm-hmm.
you're choosing to do it. You
Hmm.
get to choose that or not. And if they keep pushing you, you can say, I just don't. I'm just not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
It's
can
clear.
hear that
Yeah.
I'm saying this with a level of like equanimity in my voice. Like in the
Yeah.
beginning, you're going to feel like you're going to die. You're
Mm,
not. But
mm,
the better you get at it, the easier it is to speak in a nice, calm voice. I'm a huge fan of politeness. I think it's really important to be polite unless someone is dangerous, inebriated, just won't take, like there are certain circumstances where you just need to be a jerk to people. But
yeah.
most of the
Right.
time,
Yeah.
you just repeat yourself firmly and politely. And,
Yeah.
if they keep pushing and they keep pushing and keep pushing, then sometimes you need to kind of get loud. And, one of
Mm,
my tips when I teach people about building boundaries, one of my communication tips is to do it promptly, and it's a lot easier to not explode when you do it promptly and because you
okay.
have ease of mind. And then the other one I tell them is be polite. And the reason I say that is because I think what happens for a lot of us is we get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed way past our limit and then
Yeah.
we explode and it works. So we think, oh,
Right.
that's what setting boundaries is. No, it's not. I mean,
Right.
sometimes it is, but if you had said something right away rather than waiting till you were pushed way past your limit, then you wouldn't have built up that tension and that resentment. And you would have said something easily
Yeah.
like, I'm going to say no, or I'm going to decline, or I'm going to pass, or thank you for asking me, but not this
Hmm.
time.
This I heard this phrase recently called the explosive doormat. So it's like doormat, 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 and then the doormat just explodes one day.
I got to
And
write
how
that down.
maybe
Explosive
I
doormat.
like that. How we can maybe avoid being the explosive doormat by, like
Yeah.
you say, it sounds to me like having your, if you have certain rules about your life that you've come to, then and you get really clear on them, and then having a few phrases in your pocket so that you don't get caught off guard, like when you're talking about saying it promptly. I can see that. Or you kind of go like, maybe, and then you go away
Mhm,
with a whole bunch of stress and worry
mhm,
about how you're going to tell them that you don't want to
mhm,
do it. So
mhm.
what do you
Yeah.
say about having a few phrases just in your back pocket?
Yeah, I mean, I've just shared a whole bunch of them with you, and it's
Mm-hmm.
funny. It's so easy for me to come up with them now from both. I mean, I do this all day, so of course, but also just from my own life. Like, what has happened for me is frequently people will come to me and say, like, here's my situation. What's the boundary? And I can often come up with something. And somebody said to me, how do you know, Barb? How did you just do that? And I'm like, okay, let me slow down what's going on inside my head. And I realized what I did
Yeah.
was like, okay, let's pretend that's me. And I put myself in that situation. And because I know who I am and I know what's okay and
Mm-hmm.
not okay with me, I'm grounded in me. I know immediately what the answer is, whether something is okay and not okay. So then I say, well, here's what I would say. If that was me, here's what I would say. So I
Yeah.
think, I've said a few things. I do have a handout called Tips and Scripts for Saying No, which I can share with you, or people can go to my website and get it too, that has, some phrases
Mm-hmm.
like that.
That's great. Tips and
Um,
scripts. Love that. Yeah.
yes, yes. So actually there was something else I was gonna say there, but I lost it, so it couldn't have been that important.
It'll come back. But when you're
Yeah.
grounded in yourself and you can put them at yourself in their shoes, like it just would come naturally. And
Mhm.
so it sounds like it does feel like the words get caught in your throat. You feel like you're not going to survive this no,
Right. Yes. Yeah.
and you don't have to be mean about it, and just like,
Mhm,
but having
mhm,
some
yeah.
scripts. But
Yeah, I
for
thought
those
of the
times
other thing.
afterwards, yes,
I thought of it.
you have another thing.
So Yes, I thought of the other thing. So one of my other tips is to pause. So this is my number one tool that I learned in recovery. In the beginning, I was like, great idea. I have no idea how to do it. And I have a whole episode on how to do that, or two actually. If people are interested, they
Okay.
can message me about that. But so if you know what the answer is, then say it promptly. Just say no. Okay. If you don't really know whether you want to say no or not, then pause and say something like, let me get back to you. I need to think about it. I need to look at my schedule. I need to check with my spouse, and then give yourself time to think about it if you so that you can actually use your frontal lobe, your higher order brain, thinking about it
Mm,
rather than feeling like you're going to die, not being able to think clearly, and some yes comes out that you don't want to. Or if you know that you want to say no and you just do not have it in you in that
mm-hmm.
moment to say no, then buy yourself some time by pausing and say, let me get back to you. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
then
Okay.
you go away wherever and you gather yourself together and you
Yeah.
think about, okay, I really know that I don't want to do this. Let me look at my tips and scripts, or let me write out some scripts or something like that. And then perhaps you email them or text them and say, I've thought about it and I'm going to pass. Thanks. Or I've
That's
thought about it
great.
and this isn't going to work for me. Or I've looked at my schedule and this isn't going to work. Or that day doesn't work for me, but if we could do it in February, then I could do it. But
Mm-hmm. Many
pausing,
options.
right, so many options. But what it allows you to do is think clearly, because the reason that we feel like we're gonna die, we're not,
Yeah.
but we're in fight or flight mode. That's a trauma response. And lack of boundaries is a result of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a
Lack of
result of
boundaries is a
like
result of trauma.
it's a result of trauma. Codependence is a result of trauma. And actually, I want to say something I heard in my first like 6 months of recovery. I heard, Tyan Dayton. She's a psychotherapist. She does a lot of dramaturgical therapy. She's written books about adult child
Yes.
syndrome, about boundaries, etc. Anyway, I heard her on a podcast and she said, I've been around since like codependence like came on the scene. And what's happened over time is that the research and theory on trauma has advanced beyond that of codependence. And we now know that codependence is a result of trauma. And here's why. So what she said was, when we're in fight or flight mode, we're in the trauma reaction, I call it our lizard brain, like you're acting out of your
Mm-hmm.
lizard brain, and you cannot get to the higher order, like the frontal lobe, like the human part of the brain. You're not supposed to, because you're supposed to take all that energy and go to fighting or fleeing. Well, the
Right.
self is an ever-changing abstract concept, and it lives in the frontal lobe. So when you're in fight or flight mode, you cannot get to self in the frontal lobe, so you
Mm.
must go outside of self. I'm literally getting tingles just thinking about remembering,
Mm.
because when she said that, it was like this chunk of understanding fell into place for
Yes.
me. Because I'm one of those people who, like, I suffer from the need to understand things. It's very hard
Okay.
for me to buy into something if I don't understand it. And I was like, oh, I get it. And that really,
Yeah.
really helped me a lot.
Yeah. That's
And
powerful.
so when we're setting boundaries with other people, we're differentiating ourselves. We tend to be enmeshed with other people. And it's like, like I'm part of you and you're part of me. And so to extricate ourselves from that, it's so foreign to us. This is why
Yeah.
we feel other people's feelings and why we can't tolerate it when other people are upset. And we especially can't tolerate it when people are upset with us, because
Yes.
of this enmeshment, and boundaries are the opposite of that.
Yeah. Yes. This is the key for, the empaths that I work with. It usually comes about as a result of not having a clear sense of self and clear
Yes.
boundaries. But what you just said about, the actual neurobiology about it
Mhm.
takes the shame and the blame out of it. It's like, this
Oh
is what
yeah.
happens. This is what happens to
Right.
you. And
Right.
that's why
Right.
you are surviving the way that you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think of my codependence as like an addiction. Like I'm addicted to people. I mean, I feel like I'm a recovered codependent at this point. I'm probably
mm,
always going to have these tendencies, but I don't
mm.
act on them anymore. And I'm really, I don't think it's any mistake also that I became a boundaries coach because how can I possibly ever let go of my boundaries when I talk about it all day? Right.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah, yeah.
like,
You have to practice what
you
you
know,
preach. Yeah,
right. We teach what we need to learn, like I
yeah,
need to make sure that I stick to my boundaries for the rest of my life. Well, here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to become a boundaries
yeah,
coach,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. Come and join me. So, what do you think about making up excuses or saying something that's not true? Like when you just
Nope, nope,
really don't
nope,
want
nope,
to go and you
nope,
say,
nope, nope,
"Well,
no,
I'm busy."
no,
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about that.
absolutely not. No. Okay. So I mentioned the piece about integrity before. Like what I often don't really talk about with people is that to me, building healthy boundaries is all about integrity. It's about getting back into integrity with yourself. You cannot be in integrity when you're lying. You
Hmm.
get to take responsibility for your life and your boundaries. So when you're making up bullshit excuses and you're blaming things on other people and saying like, "Oh, I can't because my boss won't let me," when there's no boss or there's no policy, like you get to be an adult who's in charge of your life. Now, I
Yeah,
understand there are some people who they're not going to be able to do that in the beginning. Like just know that the goal is ultimately to like just stand firm. You don't have to tell people reasons. You can if you want to. You can just
yeah.
say,
Got it. Yeah,
I'm not going to
yeah,
make it. I'm going to pass. Not this time. Ask me another
yeah.
time, you know?
Right. There are ways to say it. Yeah, that it keeps
Yeah.
you in your integrity so that you don't feel like you are hiding.
Right.
Because you're probably hiding in other areas of your life if you have to hide from your true self.
Right. Right, right, right. And you don't like you may feel unsafe in the beginning and that like you do have to hide. This is why it's probably a good idea to work with other people, whether it's like in a 12-step recovery group or a coach like me or a therapist or another kind of coach so that you have
Yeah,
someone on your side that
yeah,
like they know what you're doing and what you're going through and they're supportive and affirmative and nurturing of you and all that sort of thing.
yeah. They've
But
got your
like if
back. Yeah.
right, exactly. Like I learned how to build boundaries while I was doing the 12 steps with three other women. I think it was probably 2 years after I had healthy boundaries that it even occurred to me how important those women were in my
Mm,
development because they said things like, keep your hands away from the keyboard, Barb, or like, you don't
yeah,
have to respond to that, or you are not a bad person for not
yeah,
responding to that
yeah.
email.
That's huge.
Or you
Yeah.
don't have to put up with that. Like just like affirming me and reinforcing my, and telling like I needed to be told you're not a bad person because that was for me. Like, it
Hmm.
wasn't so much that I wanted people's approval, Madeline. It was that I didn't want their disapproval. Like, I do
Right.
not
But
want you thinking
it's
I'm a bad person.
so true for almost so many women that when
Yeah,
it really comes to it, reminding yourself that you're not a bad person. And when you
right.
feel
Yeah.
guilt, that doesn't make you a bad person. You haven't done anything wrong.
Right, right. Just because you have the feelings of guilt doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It's the
Right.
programming from the past. It's that you're stepping outside of the dysfunctional pattern. And so, like,
Yeah.
one of the things that happens in my ACA program is people feel like like first of all, there's a stereotype that people sit around and complain about their parents. That's not what happens. Every once in a while, somebody might complain about their parents, but that's not really what happens most of the time. But some people feel like they're being disloyal to their parents by talking about what happened, by sharing like the family
Right.
secrets.
Yeah.
And it's actually healing to do that. But here's the thing. You're not being disloyal to your parents. You're being disloyal to the dysfunction. So
Yes, to the
pretend that
pattern.
abuse
Yeah.
did not happen is very unhealthy,
Hmm.
right? So we're
Yeah.
not doing
Yeah.
this.
That's good.
We call it taking a blameless family inventory.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
doing this to blame people. We're doing it to take the secrets out of the dark and
Yeah. Yeah.
acknowledge this happened to me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Truth.
heal if I pretend it didn't happen to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that comes so much, like, just, the truth. This is actually a fact of what happened to me, and this is how I felt. That's a truth.
Mhm.
And brings you into such a much clearer relationship. You can't have a clear relationship with yourself or your family, if it's shrouded in secrecy and shame and
Right.
denial.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then you're able to see your parents in a better, more realistic light, as well as
Yeah.
humans like the rest of us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, family dysfunction is intergenerational. So your parents literally did the best they could. It probably wasn't good enough, but they did the best they could.
Mhm.
Right. No, like, and one of the things in our literature, it says denial is the glue that holds dysfunctional families together. And in this case, it doesn't mean like that didn't happen or that's not true. It means that we act like things weren't traumatizing when they were. We think things are normal that are not. We think things are fine when they were patently unhealthy, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Well, nobody would ever purposely pass down family dysfunction to their children. So denial is important part of the passing it on. And so a huge part of the recovery is coming out of denial. And one of the
Mhm.
things you said made me think of the phrase, like, the truth shall set you free. Well, here's the thing.
Mhm.
If you've been telling the truth your entire life, you have no idea what that phrase means. But if you've been lying, like I have my entire life, or pretending stuff did not happen your entire life, and you start to tell the
Mhm.
truth about it, then you know what it means to say, the truth shall set you free. Because you are no longer
Mhm.
shackled by trying to hide behind the lies, and you get to
Yeah.
go out into the light of day and receive the warmth and the sunshine.
Oh, yeah. 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 And the sky is clear. The sky is
Yes.
clear.
Yes.
Barb, that's such a beautiful way to put it. And just this idea that when you get clear on A, yourself, what your values are, and then B, your boundaries, what feels okay, what doesn't, and that you're going to
Mhm.
survive, learn the
Mhm.
tools to be able to actually say it in the moment,
Mhm.
that stuff starts to change on its
Mhm.
own, without you
Mhm.
having to micromanage everybody else around you, to so
Mhm.
that you can set a boundary or whatever it might be. But that
Mhm.
actually, that's the power move. And then
Mhm.
things change around that.
Absolutely.
It might feel very, very big to some people, but if you think about it, it's so much easier than managing the world.
Mhm. Yeah, so that brings me to a quote that I share in one of my modules, and I thought I knew what it meant before recovery. No, I didn't. I believe it's a Chinese proverb, and it goes like this: It's easier to put slippers on your feet than to carpet the world. So the idea is, for most of us, we've been trying to control people, places, and things around us. And we can't do it. It's easier to control us. So, yes, the world has sharp, jagged edges. Wouldn't it be nice if we put a nice, cushy carpet over the whole world so we never stubbed our toe? Well, that's ridiculous, right? When we're talking about the whole world, we know we can't do that. It'd just be a lot easier to put slippers on your feet. Well, when we're trying to get other people to like us and to do things the way we want, and when we're trying to be helpful to people so they'll do things our way, it's exhausting because we're trying to control everything around us when that's carpeting the world. And instead, we can put slippers on our feet. So, what are the slippers that you're going to put on your feet?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there
Mm-hmm.
are places that, like, if people that are like, don't ever follow through on anything, and that's what all your friends are like, then stop trying to make your friends turn into people who follow through on things and start hanging out
Yeah.
with people that actually follow through on things. Like, what can
Yeah.
you do? You can go find new friends. You cannot turn
Yeah.
them into people who follow through.
Yes. And when you say it like that, it's so obvious, right? For all those people that have those patterns of people pleasing and codependence.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I love that quote. And it's like putting on your own oxygen mask first, because
Yes.
you, if you
Yes.
die, you can't help anyone
Can't
else
help
in
people.
the
Yeah.
airplane. You can,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Barb, I feel like this is a great place for us to just come full circle, and what a clarifying, powerful conversation, and how,
Yeah.
with all the tips and tricks and what you discovered through,
Mhm.
your own experience, that this is really what we're talking about in so many other ways. but that this is the thing that moves the dial in
Absolutely. Yeah.
for
In
us to
so
be able
many
to live
areas.
in so many
Mhm.
other areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you
Well,
so much for
you're
clarifying that
welcome.
for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
for inviting me. This is a fantastic conversation. I loved it. You
I
asked
loved
really
it.
good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I just, I'm so passionate about this, about boundaries and codependence and helping, highly sensitive women just really
Mhm.
be able to do exactly what you're saying, like live in
Mhm.
integrity with their own values and know that they're okay
Mhm.
and that they
Mhm.
are worthy enough and they have a right in this
Mhm.
world to make these
Mhm.
choices for themselves. So I
Yeah.
feel like you
Yeah.
put that in a really, really
Yeah.
nice package for us today. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I'm so
So
glad.
I will leave all the links. We will leave the links for how people can follow up with you and go to your podcast, Fragmented to Whole, which
Mhm.
sounds like it's really worth listening to. And
By the way, 300 episodes as of Monday. I just
woohoo! Oh
recorded
my goodness,
100
that's almost
episodes.
one a year for a whole year.
Yeah, yeah. So they can binge for a long time. Yeah, and they're 10 to 20-minute episodes. They're not long. But well, the 300th and the 299 were long because they were special. But yeah, they're mostly
Right,
10 to 20 minutes.
but
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, just like kind of bite-sized pieces. Just it's like continually
Mhm.
reminders back to yourself.
Mhm.
Reminders. It's
Mhm.
not like that to that integrity uh,
Mhm.
that we know we just need to practice. So
Mhm.
thanks again for being here, and thanks to everyone who has listened today. And may you take this information further and into your own life, so that you can also live in integrity with your own values.
Thank you so much, Madeline. This is great.